Hey everyone, this is chapter 5 for week 3, and we're mostly talking about measurement, instruments, and sampling. So some of this will be review from the research methods class, but I'm going to focus probably more on the instrument or the survey development part of this. And just a reminder, quiz 1 is due this Sunday. It doesn't cover this chapter, that'll be in the next quiz, but this quiz covers chapters 1 through 4. Okay, so the first thing about measurement instruments is that an instrument is an item used to measure the variables of interest. So it could be a survey, it could be a measurement tool, but the main idea is you're trying to understand the variable that you're interested in, and then how do you measure it appropriately. Instrumentation, it's a collective term that describes all measurement instruments. So as I mentioned, you might have an instrument tool like a weight or a height board, or you might have a survey, or you might have some type of other kind of device or something to measure. So that's just in a broader category of instrumentation. But then you have tests, and this really has more to do with educational measurement, or you can test knowledge, for example. But a test, generally educational measurement. Now, a questionnaire, which is a survey instrument, this is where you gather information on different factors. So it could be awareness, skills, behavior, it could be intentions, it could be knowledge about specific topics. So this is kind of more of the typical survey that we think about when we're thinking about measurement and surveying people and doing those types of studies. Within any of these measurement tools, typically a survey, you will have something called scales. And a scale could include multiple questions, and it's really used to measure a type of concept. So it could be attitudes, it could be a social support scale, it could be a depression scale, anxiety scale. So it's one that typically has multiple items, and then again, it's designed in order to capture and measure a specific concept. So these are just some general terms around measurement instruments, instrumentation, and the difference between tests and a questionnaire, which could include a lot of questions, and maybe even some tests within a questionnaire. But generally, a questionnaire has gathers different information, and a questionnaire can also include scales that again measure different types of concepts. So using an existing measurement instrument. So I'm a huge advocate for not having to reinvent the wheel, especially when it comes to public health, and some of the concepts that we're interested in, they may have been studied heavily, or maybe they haven't. So it's not that you need to come up with a new scale or a new survey each and every time. There may be something that already exists. It saves a lot of time, and of course it saves costs, but you have to be really careful in making sure that it is both appropriate and relevant to what you are asking and what you want to measure. And also, many times, that it also applies to the community or the population that you intend to work with. So if an instrument has only been tested in one population, likely it may or may not work for the next. So those are just some things you want to think about. But when you're looking at an instrument or some type of tool or survey that already exists, there are a couple steps that you want to take. The first one is to get your hands on the instrument. So identifying where these are, it can be in peer-reviewed papers, in the literature. I would also look at national or local surveys. So NHIS, BRFSS, or CHIS, those have surveys with a ton of scales that are already existing. So it's nice to be able to have those as resources. So, first when you're looking for questions or entire surveys, I definitely look at some of these resources. And then you want to get your hands on the instrument. This is a step because sometimes there are tools or surveys that you have to pay for, or you have to make certain requests. Sometimes if it's a large organization, they want to know what variables you want and what questions you're asking in order to make sure people aren't using or investigating the same thing at the same time. So you want to figure out what is the process for getting your hands on the instrument. And then you want to ask yourself a lot of questions. You know, is this the right instrument? What are the psychometric properties? Meaning, do the questions go together? What is it measuring? Is it used? Has it been used in a specific population? Maybe, hopefully, that are similar to your participants. Is it culturally appropriate? What is the reading level? So you want to ask these questions to see, you know, is this the right survey or other measurement instrument that I need? And then finally, asking for permission. So I kind of alluded to that in number 2, you know, how do you get your hands on an instrument? You need to figure out if there's permission or some other type of condition. So those are some questions you can ask yourself in evaluating and looking at existing instruments. But what if you can't find anything? And you're like, well, I have a very specific question and I can't find it in the literature. I can't find it in any of our known national and local surveys. I probably have to create this question. So again, create only if another cannot be found or adapted. So you don't want to create something that's been well studied if there are available questions, but sometimes, you know, some questions are just not available or thought of. And then you want to think about how to word the question, which is really important. So you want to avoid leading, which is kind of almost giving the answer or hinting at how you want it to be asked, or asking the question in a way that kind of leads towards a certain answer. In general, you want it to be simple. So try to avoid, you know, 2-part questions or double barreling questions. So you don't want to say, you know, how much fruit, do you meet the guidelines for fruit and vegetables and exercise per week? You want, if you had a question like that, you would want to separate them into 2 questions. Do you meet the guidelines for fruits and vegetable consumption? And then the next question, do you meet the guidelines for physical activity per week? And of course you would have better questions than that, but that's just an example of making sure you're not asking 2 questions in one, or having 2 parts to a question. Of course, you want to keep language simple and avoid using jargon or words that people might not understand, and then also be very specific. So in my example earlier, you know, do you meet the guidelines for fruits and vegetables? For that to be a better question, you would have to define what are the guidelines. So just make sure that whatever question you're asking, if there needs to be clarification, whether it's within the question or a note, make sure that it's as specific as possible, simple, so that someone can answer it clearly. And there are a lot of different types of questions. So you can have something that's structured. You have, you know, 3 to 5 responses. They can be matching, can be multiple choice. You know, structured is typically closed. These are the only options you have and select from here. You can have something similar, maybe a little less structured, but still somewhat closed, like a Likert scale. You can ask a question and ask people to answer from strongly agree to strongly disagree. So that's a little less structured, but then you can also have multiple choice questions with an other option. And the other option, you know, gives it just, again, it's still closed, but there's a little less structure to it. And then you have unstructured. So these are kind of your open-ended short answer or essay type questions. This is open because, you know, you're not giving responses. You're asking people to have the freedom to respond as they want. So again, those are 3 different types of levels of measurement as far as response options go. And how you present, now I'm kind of more talking about surveys, how you present the instrument or the survey is really important. Almost as important as how you word the instrument. You want to make sure that you have some type of a cover page to orient the participant to, who is giving the survey, what is it about generally, and then you have your title of your survey. I would have some type of a purpose statement, or some type of instructions about what this is about, a statement about confidentiality, instructions on how to fill out the survey. Even if it's intuitive to you, you still want to add some type of direction. Please read the following and select your responses, etc. So come up with, instructions that are clear and simple, but don't take anything for granted, and definitely make sure you have some instructions, and then also information on what the participant does when the survey is done. We'll be doing online surveys, so it'll most likely be more of a thank you, you've completed your survey, we'll get back to you soon, or something just to kind of end it for the online surveys. But sometimes when you're working on a survey in person or in the field, you might say, when you're done with part 1, see this person to do different types of measurements, or when you're done with your survey, please bring it to the moderator, or things like that. So sometimes there's other instructions for when the survey is completed. So those are just some basic components for how to put together a survey. Now when you think about what does a survey look like, you do want to have ample white space. It would be almost stressful just to look at a survey and see that it's, the page is just full. And so I think having a lot of white space creates this, this visual simplicity. And then, of course, think about indenting the response options. That way the stem of the question kind of sticks out. Sometimes you can bold the question stem. That's not necessarily my style, which is why I put maybe, but just kind of see, how does that make the questioner look? If the question calls for skipping, like if yes, answer the next ones, or if no, continue, just make sure that type of information is really clear. Again, since we're doing online, that'll happen naturally if you program it correctly. So just make sure that when you do add skip patterns, that you're instructing, the survey in the background how to handle the skip pattern. And you want to list all questions and responses vertically from top to bottom. So you don't want to do 1, 2, left and right, 3, 4, left and right. You want to just go straight down. And another tip too is to group related questions together. And this is nice because you can create sections. So you might have a section on demographics. You might have a section on healthy eating. You might have a section on stress. You might have a section on social support, so just try to think about what makes sense for your survey and try to group and have sections for that survey. And this is especially important for paper surveys, but you want to figure out what is the best way to code the survey so that it's easy for data entry and analysis. Now again, for this class, we're going to do online surveys, so we have the advantage of the data entry being automatic, and it kind of creating a database for you, even if it's Excel that you have to import into SPSS, but you already have that embedded to an online survey. But again, if you're doing a paper survey, you want to make sure that the way you're setting up the question is easy for inputting it into a database. So it's nice to use check boxes next to the response options. You're going to code the response options. Depending on the question, if it's a yes or no, you might have 0, 1 as the code, 0 for no, 1 for yes. You might have 1 through 9 if there's 9 options. So you just have to really think through, how do you want to code the different types of responses. And this third point I made gray because I don't necessarily agree with it, but it says, never ask respondents to check all that apply. Rather, have them answer yes or no for each response option. And the reason I don't totally agree, because I have had some questions that says, you know, what type of cancer do you have in your family history? And there's a list of, you know, there was a list of like 20 types of cancers, maybe, or maybe less than that. Definitely more than 10, I think. But sometimes you want the burden to be on you and not the participant. So for me, it would seem more burdensome to ask them, you know, 10 of the exact same question, where I can just ask check all that apply. So I do, you know, do that in practice. And the reason is, I think the reason that they say don't do that is because it is easier to code yes, no for each response. But again, you don't want to burden your survey participants. So when you ask someone to check all that apply, the work then goes to you. You have to create new variables. So if there was 10 potential responses, you would have to create another 10 new yes or no questions. And this is something you would do on the back end. So again, the burden is on you to figure out how to code and create these questions from the check all that apply. But I, you know, would not put that burden on the participant. And again, if there was only 3, that would be much easier, and you can just add yes, no, you know, to this question, yes, no to that question. But if it's something like a long list that you just want them to check all that apply, I would think twice about having every single question be yes, no. And again, try to take the burden off the participant as much as possible, because there's a lot of things that you can do with a database on the back end. Okay, so really important is to look at example surveys, especially try to look for surveys that are similar to your topic. As I mentioned, look at some of the surveys that we have available for us online, our national, local surveys. For this class, just as practice, we're going to do electronic versus paper. Paper surveys, you know, it's there are a lot more steps to it as far as coding, you know, extracting the information, data entry, and it's really nice. It's a really nice advantage for the electronic version because it takes some of that away. It doesn't mean there's no human error in how you program your online survey, but if you can program it well, it does take away a lot of the other steps that you would need to do with paper surveys. From the beginning, you always want to develop your survey with data entry and the database in mind. And this just really sets you up for being able to work with the variables that you have, and then you can have really good analyses. So you're just kind of setting yourself up to have the best, you know, possible data, and it's organized, it's clean, and that'll help you with your analyses as well. You'll make mistakes and then you'll learn from them. So especially when I did this with paper surveys, there are certain things that I would not tell the class just to let them make natural mistakes. And then it always made for good discussion. And it would, you know, usually someone would forget to add tracking ID or, you know, didn't number things correctly. And then we would talk about it and why it's important and makes it easier for input into a database. With the electronic or online surveys, you'll still make probably a few mistakes, or I wouldn't say maybe totally mistakes. Maybe you'll figure out ways to do things more efficiently or make things more simple. So there'll be things that you can definitely adjust that you'll just have to work on. So the one thing I want to make super clear for this exercise is that your survey doesn't have to be perfect. What we end up doing as part of class discussion is talking about, you know, what were some of the challenges in making a survey and what can you do to remedy them. So I'm not really grading you per se. Of course, I want to see good effort, but I'm not really grading you on a perfect survey. but I want to see that you're making the best effort, and then we talk about how you can improve it. So that's probably the best way to put it, is you're going to make some mistakes, but we're also going to talk about how to improve it. And that's, for me, that's a part of the process, and that's a part of the grade, not so much that everything is perfect. I also have a Pick Health survey posted in Cougar Course, so you can see one of my surveys. I will admit that it's not perfect, which is why I don't mind using it as an example, because I don't want you to see a perfect one. And the most obvious thing for me is that I do have some questions that use similar responses, but then they're formatted differently. And that's probably because I was using, different scales or different surveys that have been used before, and I was just kind of continuing their format. But what I would have done differently was make sure to reformat all the different types of questions into a way that's consistent. So that's one thing that I would have changed in my survey. But the Pick Health survey is a really good general example for a paper survey. So again, for this class, you're going to do online surveys, but generally it is good to kind of see what would it look like on paper. But anyhow, so that's an example from one of my surveys, and it's kind of what I more or less expect you to use kind of as a template, but at the same time, I want you to look at other surveys online and just be able to format it in a way that you think looks, simple, and kind of open with white space, but also easy to follow, so that when you do create a survey, it's easy for the participants to take them. Okay, so again, based on, now everything is kind of positioned around this grant that you chose, and now you have your specific aims in. I'll be getting those back to you this week, and hopefully in the next few days, so that you can really think about how all of this connects. But based on your grant and your specific aims, you're going to develop a short online survey. And this is going to be given to the class to fill out in week 5. You want to be sure to include the following elements. You want a cover page, instructions, how to fill it out, instructions, what to do when the survey is completed, which can just be, thank you, you're done, no further action is needed. But I also want you to include some very specific things so that you can practice and see how it works. I want you to include at least one skip pattern. So some place where someone, if they answer yes, they proceed, or if they answer no, they skip to another question. I do want you to include one question that is select all that apply. And then that way we can kind of go through how do you handle that data. And then include one unstructured question. So again, this is an open-ended question where people get to write in their responses. And then, make sure to include 3 to 5 demographic questions. So those are just some of the elements I want to make sure you include. What you're going to do, again, based on your specific aims of your grant, is where everyone's going to do kind of like a mini intervention. I think I want to call it more like a mini pilot study. And so with your aims, one of the things I emphasized was to have at least one of your goals be something that you could change within someone in, one presentation. It's kind of hard to do, but we're going to just try it because I want you to see, kind of before and after. But think about just a really simple 5 to 8 minute video, PowerPoint presentation. One way to think about this is maybe you're presenting facts that you want people to gain knowledge about. Maybe you're presenting a case for something where you want them to, have greater intention to do XYZ. Whatever it is, again, your mini presentation is just going to be 5 to 8 minutes. And again, the rest of your classmates are going to watch this and take a survey about it. So try to think of something that they will learn from it. And it could be throwing in a random fact. In what year did this happen? I just kind of want you to see what it looks like when people have watched your video versus those who haven't. So that's kind of everything, the online survey, of course, is based on your grant, and your mini intervention is kind of based on one of those specific aims as well. Oh, and then if you're done with your survey, get started on your mini presentation. I kind of call it your mini intervention presentation. Oh, here was another tip. Sorry. Be intentional about the change that you want to see in your pre-post survey. So I'm thinking that we will do pre-post surveys for everybody. I might include some nuances to the design of who takes the survey and when. But again, I just wanted to emphasize the point of try to think about what is it that you're going to talk about in 5 to 8 minutes. And in your survey, what is something that you can capture? A change in a thought, an increase in knowledge, some change in attitude. It can be a little tricky, but try to just think of at least one thing that you might be able to change in someone within that amount of time. Okay, so I just kind of wanted to show like how this work relates to our schedule. So really what you're doing right now in week 3 is due at the end of week 4. So it's your intervention presentation, and and your surveys are due November 17th. So essentially they're due in a little more than a week, like a week and a half. But that's what I want you to start working on for your writing lab this week. And then at the end of week 4, they're due along with your survey. And then by week 5, everyone is going to watch the different presentations. It's almost like an intervention. And then they're going to take a survey about that presentation. And so then everyone has to complete that by November 24th. So again, your intervention presentation, which again is 5 to 8 minutes long. It can be a PowerPoint voiceover. That's due November 17th, as well as your online survey. And I'll go over a little bit more detail in the next slide. Okay, so this is your week 3 writing lab. And again, nothing is due until November 17th. The only other thing you have to worry about this week is your quiz 1, which is chapters 1 through 4. But again, what you should be working on this week is a mini intervention, 5 to 8 minute presentation. The minimal requirement is a voiceover PowerPoint. If you want to do video, if you want to have animation or anything extra, feel free. That might be a great way to, engage your audience and maybe teach something, or there's some other aspect of a video that you're going to embed. But at a bare technical minimal requirement, it just has to be a 5 to 8 minute presentation, and it could be a voiceover through PowerPoint. And when I kind of talk about presentation, again, you're presenting on your topic. So if your grant is about diabetes and increasing testing knowledge, then you're going to have a presentation about diabetes and the different types of tests that you can do or screenings, and then your survey is going to ask about that. So again, everything is linked together. And again, here's just a list of what I want to make sure you include in your online survey. It should include at least one select all that apply, a skip pattern, 3 to 5 demographics, one unstructured question. You just want to make sure that it really aligns with your specific aims. And then if you think there's any confounders, it could be age, it could be stress, it could be social support. So things that might influence your results, you might want to add those questions too. But for the general purpose, just kind of stick to the main topic of your grant and your specific aims. But you also want to think ahead about, again, data entry and how this helps with your analysis. So are you tracking participants? Are you asking them to have certain numbers? Again, with online, it's easy because it kind of does it for you. It also does the data entry for you. But in general, you just want to think, is this the way that you've designed it or the questions you've added doesn't make it easy to analyze. And I'll give you one quick example. Let's say you were interested in some type of cancer that was maybe only relevant for those aged 50 and over to get screened. So one way to ask age is, are you 50 years old and older or younger? So you just have two questions, or a yes or no, which maybe is all that you think you need. But then if we go back and say, oh, we actually really want to do a correlation between age and knowledge. Well, now you don't have as much information. All you have is whether they're 50 years old or older or not. So you always want to try to collect the most minimal or maximum, I don't know if it's minimal or maximum, but the most amount of information you can. So instead of collecting something where it's just yes or no, with age, you might want to ask just age. So now you have data from those who are 18 to 99, and now you have the variable in a format, right? It's in a ratio format where you can now do a correlation with some other scale that's in your survey. So you just want to think about, am I limiting my data, right off the bat in the way that I'm asking a question, or am I allowing a few more responses? Because if you need to collapse the data and have yes or no's, even though there's 10 responses, then you can do that on your end. So just try to think about those nuances, and those are things we'll talk about as we see examples from everybody's survey. Try to limit it to about 10 to 12 questions because we're going to be taking a lot of surveys in this class. So try to keep it short and sweet, but at the same time, hit all of these examples. And if you need to do a little bit more, that's okay too, but try to make it as concise as possible while still kind of adding all of the elements that I mentioned. You can develop your survey using SurveyMonkey. You can use Qualtrics, which is software that is available to all CSUSM faculty, staff, and students. So I would just, try that out, see if that's something you want to use, or you could use Google Forms. If there's some other platform, feel free to use that, but these are the top 3 that are probably easiest to use in a way that you can send, me the link, and then you can also look at it, the information on the back end. So again, this is your week 3 writing lab. There's no writing lab due per se. This week, it's actually due November 17th, so the end of week 4. However, as you get started with your mini intervention and your survey, I would highly encourage you to make a meeting with me or see me in office hours so we can just have even a 10-minute or 15-minute conversation about where you're at, what your ideas were for the mini intervention and online survey, and many times that makes a huge difference. So even just having a quick conversation with me during office hours or creating your own appointment can really help guide the work that you're doing. And for me, that's the easiest way to help give you feedback as well, is just to have a conversation, long or short. I'm always, available to meet during office hours, of course, but I'm also open to other times as well. Okay, so the next couple of slides are actually just on measurement itself and different types of variables and also sampling. These are things that we covered in your research methods class in 507, so it's more of a review. So just go ahead and review the rest of these slides to help with your survey development. But again, I just want to encourage you to either meet me online Wednesdays 3 to 4 p.m. with your questions, or set up a meeting so that we can go over your specific aims and then talk about how that relates to your mini intervention and how that relates to your survey. So again, encouraging you to see me during office hours or make an appointment with me, and I look forward to talking with you soon.